Good morning, everyone. Jackie McIntyre here. Welcome. It is a Friday morning here in where I live in Queensland, Australia, and it is Easter Friday. I planned that well, didn't I? So to everyone who is experiencing Easter Friday, happy Easter Friday. And then for those of you cool dudes who are out in the Northern Hemisphere, then you'll be experiencing a Thursday evening. And so happy Thursday evening to you all at this point in time. I'm going to be leaving this webinar up on my page. I'm also going to be popping it on my YouTube channel so that you guys get to look at this later if you like, and other people can come on board and do it that way. So this is another series, and it's super special because we're going to be talking about and diving into and pulling apart judgment and projection. And I say another series because this is the second series in amongst many that I'm going to be doing over quite a few months. This is the second series, and if you did not come along on the journey with me for the previous one, then you've already missed out on a load of information that was around exhaustion and burnout. And it was fantastic. It ran over 3 pretty huge free webinar events, and there were several resources that people had access to that were designed to really help and support you along the way in understanding exhaustion and burnout, and also being able to heal it and understand what's behind it so that you can heal it and repair it completely, which is possible. So there was a free guide that went along with that, and also a free checklist. Those are still available. So if you haven't seen that series and you want the entire series, you're actually going to find it on the Facebook page here. But if you don't want to sift through everything and try to find it that way, just head over to my YouTube channel and you can find it there. It's set up in its own playlist. I will put the link to that in the comments section after we finish. So what I want to encourage you to do as we go along is ask questions if you have questions. If you notice anything about what I'm saying and it applies to you, or you want a little bit more information, then just simply pop your hand up and let me know, okay? So let's move on and dive in, because I'm really excited to lead you through judgment and projection. It's one of the things that people really come to me about very often. And it's quite often one of the really big pieces that we work through, whether we're doing one-on-one treatment sessions or coaching, or whether it's happening in group situations. And it's such an exciting topic to be able to work through. So that you can understand it better and you can really start to wrap your mind around how judgment and projection generates, where it comes from, how to change it. And what usually happens is when I take a client through this, they start to have a really different understanding of not only how judgment and projection works within them, but then automatically it helps them to understand how it works in other people as well, because it's the same type of process. The core reasons for it can be very different. Sometimes they can be similar, but it will never ever be the same, because everyone's story and journey through life and their genetics and everything is completely different to anybody else. There's not another person on the planet like you. So everyone's story is different. The core reasons for that judgment and projection are going to be very different. But the way that it generates and the reasons for it, how it comes out, can be very similar. So we start to understand how it actually works in other people as well, and the finer working pieces to it. And for many people, it really changes the way that they view judgment and projection, and the way that they feel about it as well. instead of getting really worked up about judgment or when somebody's projecting, you find that you much softer, less triggered, but more understanding as well. So I find often that a person becomes far less judgmental towards a person who was being judgmental towards them, which is quite often then what happens. You meet a judgment with a judgment because it's the trigger process that we go into. And now, because somebody's really empowered by understanding and they have lots of clarity around how it all works, it also means that then I find a lot of people just stop taking it personally. It just seems to become a non-event at all. And that's a really, really, really great thing. Lots of people love that. Hey, Lisa there. Feel free to ask me any questions. We've got a really brief webinar today. So firstly, to understand judgment, and I'm going to discuss the judgment side of things more today. It will help you then to be able to understand and digest the information as we move through the next couple of weeks. And I'll talk more about projection in moving forward. It'll be easier to understand projection then. But first, we need a little bit of clarity around the different types of judgments. So if you were to go and look up online what the meaning of judgment is, it says that it's the ability to be able to make considered decisions or come to sensible conclusions. That is part of it. But what I would like to add there most definitely for you is, if I could write that for you, I would say that it's the ability to make considered decisions or come to sensible conclusions for you based on your own needs and what is right for you. So when it's left open like that, and the statement tells a person that judgment is the ability to make considered decisions or come to sensible conclusions, it tells that person that it's based off what you perceive or judge to be right. And then a person tends to take that judgment and cast a net over many people or vast situations, depending on what the factors are, right? And another explanation of judgment is that it can be a misfortune or a calamity event that a person sees as divine judgment. Again, it denotes that somebody has to make a judgment on something to say that it is divine punishment or that it was just, right? And to really understand judgment, this first webinar is so important. In fact, throughout the whole series of webinars, I'm going to keep referring back to this one for anyone new that comes in, because understanding this first one is really, really important. If at any point during this series over the next 3 or 4 weeks, you share any of the information or the videos, I really encourage you to tell the person to come back and watch the first one, because it will help things to make a lot of sense, right? We need to first start understanding the way in which your mind is going to show you the way that it works and the way that it deals with judgment, processes judgment, and the way that it sets itself up and works for you. Because it's the same in everyone, the way that the mind works and then produces all of these things. And when you can start to wrap your understanding around that and just get some basic bits and pieces around how it all works, the mind works, consciousness works, then you can start having some real light bulb moments or aha pieces around perhaps the way that you do things or things that have been happening to you in your life over and over. It'll bring a lot of clarity to that. So, as I said earlier, I'm going to break the information up into bite-sized pieces so that you can take what we've gone through today off with you into your life and spend some time really digesting the information. And during that time, if you have any questions that come up for you, if you want to share some realization or experiences of your own that you have, then come back to this post and put it in the comments. And I will either, depending on what it is, I'll either answer it as we go along throughout the week, or next week at our second webinar in this series, I will answer it then. So the best way for you to save the post, if you don't know, is that after the live is over, it then becomes an official Facebook post, which you'll find on my page. And when you look at the post on any device, you're going to notice in the top right hand corner of that post, there are 3 little dots. And if you click on those dots, you're going to see that it says save post. And you can simply save the post and come back to it later. I think I found out that Facebook doesn't have a limit on save posts, because I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of saved posts, which I absolutely love. So thanks, Facebook, for that ability. And for those of you that don't know how to get back to a saved post, you're actually going to find it underneath all your shortcuts, and there's a section there that usually says explore, and underneath that it says saved or saved posts, right? When you tap on that, it's going to open up and show you everything that you've ever saved. And you can either keep it or you can get rid of them, which is fantastic. Have a little bit of a clean out. Okay, then, so don't forget, I want to give you a reminder, don't forget to make sure that you get all the notifications so that you're not missing out on any really crucial information about what's coming up, what we're going to be discussing. If there's any free resources that I'm giving out, you want to make sure that you've got all of that. So especially the webinars, you want to make sure that you get access to that. So make sure that you've liked and followed the page. And when you hit the follow tab, it's important that you select that you want to see it first and that your notifications are turned on. You can change it later, but just keep it on that for while we're going out through the webinar so that you get all the goodies. Rightio, that's sorted. Let me just refresh my page, make sure that there's no... Oh, and as Lisa just says, thanks, Lisa, you can create folders in save posts. I've used these. I think that's more of a newer feature, isn't it? Because when I first started doing it, all my save stuff was just a mishmash. And I now have so many saved things that it would literally probably take me a couple of days to go through and sort them all into folders. So I don't have mine in folders. Although I do think... I beg your pardon, I think Facebook does have the capability of automatically sorting some into folders. So it'll ask you whether you want to see a video or a post or a link that takes you to an external place or something like that. So, yay. Thanks for that, Lisa. Okay, so let's jump in. There are really significant, intricate, and vast series of belief systems that are held within your mind. And I refer to them as systems because a belief is not just a standalone belief that is formed as a thought. It's not that. It contains many pieces of ingredients, kind of like an octopus. So when you have a belief about something, and if we applied it to an octopus analogy, quite often the head or the bulk part of the octopus is what we would refer to as the core belief system. And that core belief system sits very deeply in the sub or unconscious part of the mind. And then the tentacles come out, and the tentacles stretch into different parts of the brain, different parts of the body, organs, endocrine glands, different systems. It might be your cardiovascular system, the heart, the adrenals, the kidneys, wherever it is. And throughout these tentacles are smaller belief systems. So you might have somebody that, has a belief about the world is not a safe place. And that'll be something that they're consciously aware of. But it's usually just sort of a smaller belief system that has a very, very, very big impact on that person's life. Very big impact. But it still is a smaller belief system that's attached to this gigantic core belief system that they don't even realize is there. So we're going to definitely be looking at both of those categories as we move forward over the next couple of weeks, which is a lot of fun once you get diving into it. So a belief system is made up of memory, really heavily filtered memory, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes' time. And it can really easily involve and affect different parts of the body, as I mentioned before, such as the kidneys, your heart, your adrenal glands that sit on top of your kidneys. And then there's also genetic information within your cells that gets passed on ancestrally and then epigenetically. And this information can and does carry and express things like strong beliefs, habits, patterns, behaviors that are persistent emotional states such as prolonged excessive fear. It can be personality traits, so on and so forth, that have been passed on from family member to family member, and then they manifest within you and from you. So most people have no knowledge or conscious understanding that this is happening. Majority of people are of the belief that their thoughts, their traits, their patterns that they run in life, their habits that they have are their own. And it's just simply not the case. So you're way more intricate than what you give yourself credit for. Yes, it is a new feature that Facebook does. Yes, I thought so. Thanks, Lisa. Cool. So let's talk about consciousness for a second. Your own consciousness is the only thing that perhaps you don't doubt, right? You have a constant presence of thoughts that is usually validation to you that you are consciously aware of yourself, your thoughts, and the world around you. And I wonder, have you ever tried to control your thoughts? It's impossible. You can't do it. I tried to do it as a kid. I used to always think as a kid, I would try and control my thoughts. And so I learned really early on that there's something just bigger going on than what I realized, because it was impossible for me to be able to do that. And if I asked you right now to not think about an orange, don't think about an orange. Don't think about an orange, think about something else. You're going to think about that orange and you're going to try to stop it, but the thought of an orange is just going to keep coming up. You don't have full control over your thoughts. No matter how hard you try to have only the thoughts of your own choosing, other thoughts are going to keep coming up. And sometimes you're going to find that it's a negative or it's a judgmental thought that you would rather, not have. Another example of not being able to control your thoughts is when you perhaps say we're driving to work in the morning and you hear a song on the radio. How many times has this happened to you? It's happened to me so many times. You hear a song on the radio that plays, and sometimes for me it's a song that I'm not really fussed at, like one of Kylie Minogue's old songs. Sorry, Kylie. And you think to yourself, because it plays over and over again then for the rest of the day. And you're like, why can't I get rid of this song out of my head? It's just self-generating, right? You don't have any control over that. And that's what's really exciting, is that the brain is so often assumed, and I'm talking about the head brain, because for those of you that have ever done any teaching with me, you're a client of mine, you'll know that there is more than one brain in the body-mind complex. We also have a heart brain and we have a gut brain, or it's called the enteric brain, okay? So I'm just referring to like the head brain for this. But what a lot of people do is that they assume, because you're taught that the location for the mind is actually associated with your head brain. And the latest studies in neuroscience, and I mean like over the last good 10 to 12 years, tells us that it's way more complicated than that. it seems to show that your brain just registers the thoughts, but it doesn't generate them. It's the mind that generates them. The brain interprets and then registers and sends the thoughts. So we're really just on the edge of understanding the mind, because it's massive, and its complexities and how it works, which is kind of exciting to be here at this time while we're finding out all of this cool new information, because you're on the cutting edge and you get access through these webinars. And luckily I just ticked over 13 years the other day, where I've been a certified body talk practitioner for the International Body Talk Association, and I've also been an instructor as well. And I feel really privileged to hold that role, because it is one of the systems in the world, not many systems, but it's one of the few systems in the world that strives to be on the edge of the latest information that's coming out of all these research centers, that all these wonderful researchers and scientists and everything are finding out about how we work and how the fabric of our universe is functioning, and how we can look at methods for self-healing and everything like that. So it's a pretty cool time to be alive, because you get access through these modalities, through me, through lots of other people, and these webinars, so that you can grow and evolve along with that process as well. I wonder, I'll just check in and see if there's any questions. No new questions. Don't forget to ask questions if you haven't. I wonder if you've ever seen that image that gets used really wildly around the world when referring to the mind and talking about the mind, and it's the iceberg image, and it shows this image of a massive iceberg that's in the water from a side view, and the smallest portion, just a tiny bit, sits above the water's line, and that represents your conscious mind. And that conscious mind is the one that you are aware of right now. It's the one that is in part interpreting me and this information. In fact, all levels of the mind are interpreting it right now, but it's the one that interprets your day-to-day. It represents what you think and believe right now. And then underneath that water's line sits the rest of the iceberg, and it's huge, just massive. And it represents your subconscious and unconscious mind. That's how much is hidden. There are other different levels to the mind, but I'm really just going to be referring to the subconscious and unconscious mind, and also just your conscious mind, which I've just been through, right? So we're not going to complicate things by adding any other levels of the mind. These are the ones that we just need to focus on. So we know that then the subconscious and the unconscious part of the mind is gigantic, but it sits underneath the surface of the water. And when you're sitting on top of the surface of the water in your little boat, you can't see down into the water. You can't see to the depths of it. And let's just sort of say that there is no edges on the mind. It doesn't have a bottom. So if you imagine you're in this boat and you look over the edge, and you just can't see into it. There's vast mind, levels of the mind, and you don't know what's there. So you're just trying to interpret everything through your conscious mind, okay? And that subconscious mind, it represents what you truly believe about yourself and the world around you. what you truly believe. So what's hidden, what's yet to be uncovered, right? So all the things that you truly believe about yourself, the world around you, other people, things, places, events, situations that are going on, what you truly believe about your past, what you believe about your future, everything, right? And what you really believe means that you have no conscious awareness of what sits in there. It's unconscious. But it's totally possible to access it, to know what's in there, to understand it, and to also change it. And that's what I absolutely love. So it's thought that you use at best 10% of your true whole capacity for using and accessing your consciousness. 10%. Hands up if you've ever seen the movie Lucy. It's one of my most favorite movies. So it stars Scarlett Johansson and Morgan Freeman, and it's a movie that really sort of talks about the mind and the capabilities of the mind. Anyway, check it out because it's a really, really good movie. That was kind of like an aha movie for me that I've gone back to several times over, because it's always been fascinating to me to really know that we have this thing that's called the mind, which has unbelievable capacity, the capacity to instantly heal. Yet we only use and access 10% of it. And that's fascinating to me. But also, we know that as a species, we're evolving through that, right? So as a species, we're in this constant process of evolving, learning, understanding, growing, and that our conscious awareness gains little bit by little bit more on that 10% as each kind of generation evolves. And for some people individually, they can evolve quite quickly, or there can be situations or circumstances that happen to them or that they go through where they then evolve very, 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 very quickly. And then for some people, their path and their journey through life is that they don't evolve much at all. But that's okay because it's their journey, right? No judgment. Okay. So when you look around the world and you see all the people who seem to achieve amazing and outstanding, seemingly unlimited things, it's still them using a very limited amount of their consciousness. It's a few extra percent at best. So then just imagine, even then your imagination is so limited, especially by your beliefs. Imagine what could possibly be possible with full access to the mind and consciousness, using consciousness. Probably wouldn't need a plane to fly from Sydney, Australia to the UK for like a squillion hours cramped up in a seat, right? Teleportation. No, to teleport would be a thing that you could do. Yeah. So it's super, super interesting. Whenever you join in something such as this webinar, it really does help you to evolve, whether you realize it or not. And it helps you to grow beyond your limiting beliefs and judgments that you have placed on yourself around what you believe is possible or not, and achievable or not. So the fact that you're here today, listening, showing up, it just tells yourself so much about yourself, that you're an evolving human being, that you are a seeker of information and understanding, that you're really actively looking for how you can show up and just experience life in a much more happier, peaceful way, and improving your health as you go along, because that's what happens. the more your mind becomes clearer and you become less attached to things and you have less judgment against yourself, against other people, your entire body starts to just function better and better and better and better, because they mirror one another. Healthy mind, healthy body. Yeah. So let me see if I have any questions. No questions. So much of the work that I do with people one-on-one or in groups is directly looking at really working through and then turning around these unconscious and subconscious belief systems. It's a lot of fun. And it's there from being here in the subconscious and unconscious parts of the mind that judgment and projection, among many, many other things, actually lives, and it generates from as thoughts, as expression, as words, as emotions, as being triggered, as everything like that. When you or somebody else judges or projects onto somebody else, your thoughts, your feelings, your beliefs, anything like that, there is always a pretty huge set of subconscious beliefs that is generating this internally, and it can either show up as internal dialogue automatically, or that internal processing can then come outward as external dialogue. So just to recap really, really quickly, as an example, if I was working with a particular client and it becomes really evident that there's an enormous amount of fear that this person is generating, and it really affects their behaviors and what they trigger towards, what they believe in. It'll affect their relationships, their health, everything. If I was to ask them, what is this fear? Why is it there? Where did it come from? That person would be able to tell me quite a few things of what they believe the fear is and why they believe they had so much fear. And what they're doing is they're using that conscious part of their mind to access and generate that information. And it's useful information, definitely. And then what will happen is I take one or two steps very deeply into those other levels of the mind, the subconscious and the unconscious levels that we've been talking about. And I look for then the real reason that these fears are there. So going to the core of the octopus analogy, for want of a better word. And we find in every single case that is there a much bigger, deeper reason for fear lives and resides within this body-mind complex, and then generates from there. There's always at least one, if not a couple, big, very core structured belief systems that then generates it. And when you can get to that information and it can then start to change, automatically it starts to change. And not only affects the way that that person then feels or thinks, but it will also have a really profound effect on their health, the way that they live their life, their relationships, their connection to themselves, which is a profound thing. It's probably one of the biggest things that people are working on in their life and they don't even realize it, is this connection to themselves. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit in moving forward in weeks ahead, because that connection to yourself is quite defining. It really affects what you trigger towards and judgments that you hold and then place on other people and projection. So then the same is happening for other people, perhaps towards you. There's big issues in their relationship with themselves that allows them to be able to have judgment towards you, right? So it then starts to affect everything in that person's world around them once you can really eyeball what these core belief systems are and what then they're actually giving rise to and generating. So judgment and projection is very much an issue that needs to be addressed at a subconscious and an unconscious level for it to be really, really, really effective and to have lasting change for you. And that's the objective of this series of webinars for me, is that we take you through a process and start to unwrap some of that, uncover it, and then you can notice the changes within you, right? A common modern approach to addressing consciousness and the mind. So in this case, it would be that somebody wants to learn how to stop being so judgmental, or maybe they're projecting their crap onto their family around them, if we use the example of somebody. And they may go and seek talk therapy. And whilst I'm a big fan of talk therapy, and talk therapy can be really, really beneficial when discussing problems, it's really valuable to remember that it's only going to be addressing the tip of that iceberg. To be truly effective and highly, highly effective and of most help, what we want to do is actually look below that waterline where most of the mind is, because that's where the issues to the problem lay. The true core issues to the problem lay. So, as I said, I'm a massive fan of talk therapy. I use it extensively, but I make sure that it's not the only therapy that I would have. It forms part of my health team that I have around me, and I have a really wide structured health team that is set up around me, so that no matter what it is that I'm going through, or that whether it be a health issue or something that's triggered me emotionally or whatever, I have a vast amount of things that I can tap into and use to help me actually get through, understand, and then repair whatever it is that's going on for me. So talk therapy is one of those, but it's not the only thing that I do. I get a lot of therapy, a lot of value out of doing that, okay? I'll just refresh the comments to make sure that they're all coming through, because sometimes they don't. Okay, to be able to understand judgment and to be able to change it, it's really important to know the relationship between your senses and your world, and how your own expectations about that world affect your perceptions. So generally speaking, everybody is fundamentally misinterpreting the world around them through really unique filters that are associated with, or they're attached to, your senses. And when we talk about the senses, I'm pretty much just referring to sense of hearing, sight, smell, taste, and touch. Okay. And one of the other ways that you're interpreting the world around you is that information comes in through these senses and through the four ventricles of the brain, the four major ventricles of the brain. And everyone has what we call really unique filters that are on their senses and in these ventricles, and they can really heavily clog up and distort information that's coming through. And it's then distorts the information that you're ultimately getting, that the brain's getting. So it's these misinterpretations through the five senses that ultimately gives birth to all belief systems, every single one of them. And your senses depend on individual body parts functioning both individually and then collectively as a team. It's so important that that happens. And I find that there is some aspect of that that is out of whack and not working for so many people, whether it be an individual sense that is not functioning properly, or whether it be because these five senses are meant to be coordinated and synchronized beautifully, so they really are harmonized as a team, like a really good band, that sounds really good, they're harmonized beautifully, there can be really big issues that get into those five senses that distort the coordination of them. And that will really distort information that comes in that your brain interprets that it then tells you. So sometimes it is important that we need to really fix that and balance that up. And what I'll do is later on in the webinar series, I'll give you some tips and tools for how you're going to be able to do that. But for anyone watching who's a client of mine or does group work with me, then we will automatically be doing that in your treatment sessions. So we've got you covered, okay? Now, all of your sense organs, they work in tandem along with different processing centers of your brain. And they do that to be able to construct a model of the world for you so that you can interpret it. And when you are interpreting the world around you, just as you are right at this very second, what you're getting is just the end result of all of that processing. So we don't really get the whole picture of the way that things are. By the time they come through the five senses, come through the ventricles of the brain, and through all these filters that sit on there, they're either clogged up or the filters filter out information that's critical for you and that you need. So by the time you get the information at the end, it's only a small part of what is actually truly going on. So then you're trying to interpret, you're thinking that you are consciously aware and interpreting the world exactly as it is happening, and that's simply not the case at all. So one of our objectives also would be to clear the filters, to have as less filtration system or as healthy filtration system throughout those five senses, throughout the brain, throughout the four ventricles of the brain, so that you can interpret as clearly as you possibly can. That enhances your experience of the world and of yourself as well, right? So it does take some time for people to relearn what it means to be of no judgment or to not compare or project. And I wonder if you've ever considered what it would be like. And I think I asked this in our last webinar series because it's a really interesting thing to ask yourself. What would it be like if I didn't learn how to compare? If no one taught me how to compare? If I didn't have the ability to be able to compare myself to other people, my body to other people, my qualities to other people, my intelligence to other people's wealth to mine, their things to my things, yeah? If you didn't have that ability to be able to compare, what experience would you then have at life? And majority of people always say, well, I feel like it would just be more peaceful and I'd be more in my truth and I would be happier and it would be way more fun. So that's the positive. That's what lays ahead at the end of this journey, is the ability to be able to get there and to be able to feel like that, right? So when people go through this process of relearning what it means to be of no judgment, no comparing, no projection, and to be in that state is what sits really naturally at your core of being and who you are. And what this feels like is that you become more neutral in your views. You become far less judgmental of yourself, and then easily it just flows that you become less judgmental of the people around you. And that's what we're going to expect in moving forward. But then what I also want you to do is just simply challenge your beliefs about things, especially when it comes to judgment and projection. Just challenge them and ask yourself, is this really right for me? Am I really able to objectively and clearly interpret things the way that they are being interpreted? Yeah. For the moment, let's talk about this. So, from the moment that you were born and your feet hit the earth, you started to learn in really, really subtle ways how to learn about the world around you, about people around you. Majority of this learning actually came from people who raised you, from other people who were connected to them, from people who perhaps you went to daycare with, or relatives, or school, or something like that, right? You also took in lots of information and learnt from the environments that you grew up in, the wider relationships that you observed, and then the connections, more wider connections that you had to things that you saw, that you heard, that you felt, that you touched. You learned by being a massive, massive sponge. And there are several things that happen here during this time. You're perceiving the world around you through the senses, and remembering that these senses are really filtered. Everyone's senses are filtered differently. Some a little, some a lot at birth, right? So we're talking about birth, we're not talking about right now for you. And these filters, they grow over time. The first 5 to 7 years of your life, of anybody else's life, form pretty much nearly all of your opinions and beliefs about yourself and the world around you. The first 5 to 7 years. So then, as a parent, as a guardian, it's what I teach these kids, what I say to them, what I model to them, my behavior towards them in that first 5 to 7 years, that will imprint and implant into them all of their beliefs, their feelings, everything about themselves, about their world around them, about me, for the rest of their life. So they can, if they're able to, if they have the right people around them, if they challenge their thoughts, if they show up for the free webinars, they can change those perceptions and those beliefs. But just knowing that the first 5 to 7 years is profound, has a very, very big impact, then it allows you to actually be more mindful of what's going on during that time, and take more responsibility for what's going on for yourself, so that you can change your own behaviors, your own attitudes, your own beliefs, and that will have an enormous ripple effect onto them as well, right? The filters themselves at that early age, they sometimes do not work. They can get clogged up. The idea of the filters is that we take in something like 30 million bits of information every second or two. The filters help filter out a lot of that information so that you're not in overwhelm, because you just simply couldn't sustain that. You'd be in overwhelm all the time, right? So the idea is that it filters out some of the information and leaves you with just a really healthy version of what's going on around you. But what we know that happens is that these filters get clogged, they get imprinted with, memories and experiences, and especially they get imprinted with information that has come from mum and dad, the people around them, what they've seen on TV, what they get taught in their cartoons or movies or whatever like that. That all imprints as information. And so as this information sits in the filters and it clogs up in the filters, and life comes in, it really heavily distorts that information. so that the person is barely getting any correct information by the time they are consciously perceiving that. And it happens just so quickly, that whole process, within nanoseconds it happens. And the other part is that during these very early years, you yourself had experiences that you've then perceived through the senses. And they've left memory, lots and lots of memory. And what happens is that later on in life, and it starts to happen straight away, the mind does this, but then it just develops more as you gain years and as you grow up. And now, by our age, the mind is very, very proficient at doing this. It's a master of doing this, but it really learnt how to do it. So what the mind started to do is it started to fill in the blanks when you experience something. What would happen is that information, if it was similar to something that you've experienced before, as that information starts to come in through the five senses and it hits these filters, the mind interprets, it makes a judgment, and it says, oh, I know what this is. We've seen this before. We've done this before. We've been through this before. And so then it actually interprets something as being the same or similar based on memory, regardless of whether it's like that or not. So instead of letting you have just a clear, filtered, unbiased version of what's actually happening, your mind interprets the initial information, interjects, and says, I know what this is. Leave it to me. I've experienced this before. And then it tells your brain what it is that's actually going on. So it totally hijacks your relationship that you're having with the world around you, okay? And again, I think I mentioned in part of our last webinar that that's really what happens in a mind that is left to run free. It has no parameters, has no structure, and it has no training. The mind, as we've talked about, is a seriously powerful thing, full of amazing, things that it's capable of doing. And although it has a lot of positives, it also has the power to be absolutely your worst enemy and so destructive and run a life for you that you really don't want. So we're going to start putting some parameters in place just simply by understanding. That alone allows you to be able to really question it, and you sort of go, it's kind of dictating what it is that I'm experiencing. And then you can like stamp your foot. I would stamp my foot and go, that's not okay with me. Like, I want to be able to experience life as cleanly and as unfiltered as I possibly can, which means that we've got to get some boundaries in place here, okay? And let me see if there's any questions. No questions coming up. Must be doing a great job. We're nearly towards the end. So if you do have any questions, start typing them because I'm nearly finished for today, okay? Let me make sure. I just want to check my notes. I thought I had something else. No, I don't. There's another component to this, which is getting towards the end of it, is that another thing that happens in really big mass amounts is that you were told when you are growing up what it is that you are seeing or feeling or experiencing. People around you, things that you watched in programs, TV shows, heard on the radio, watched through other people interacting. It would tell you what it is that you're seeing or feeling or experiencing in that moment. So people would potentially say to you, see that? That's very bad. Or that's very, very naughty. Or that's not how we do that. Well, that's not what a good person is, yeah? And your mind log that information as truth because that's what you're told. And at that, in those age times, from birth through to about 7 years old, you're in sponge mode. You're learning, so you can evolve and start to look after yourself, form opinions, and everything like that. So you're wired to receive information and log it as truth and as memory. So whatever was said to you, you've kind of logged that information as your truth as well. And sometimes it's actually, a lot of the time, it's actually not your truth. And then your mind starts to just regurgitate information for you as being true. And it can become really, really rigid. And a rigid mind is then just really full and it's really attached to its beliefs. And it is a rigid mind is one that it will defend itself to the ends of the world, and it can be really quite aggressive or passive aggressive. That's when you see somebody like that, when they defend themselves to the ends of the earth, when they can become quite aggressive, that's a rigid mind. That's a mind that's profoundly influenced by other people's opinions, experiences in the world. Their mind is really running the world for them, the way that they're interpreting the world. Their filters, their five senses and the filters in them are heavily filtered. And that is a really, really rigid and aggressive mind. So quite often you can't do battle with that. There's 0 point in doing battle with that. So then you can just take a step back, disassociate, and come back to what's important for you and worry about, what you're doing. Just focus on what you've got going on. Okay? There are going to be specific people who will be able to help somebody who's like that. But more often than not, that's not you and that's not your job. And it will bring you a lot of conflict and pain and misery if you try to have conversations and make that person see your point of view. Yeah. So what does all of this have to do with judgment and projection? Well, everything actually, because all of your judgment and projection towards yourself, towards other people, or the judgment and projection that you've noticed that comes from other people or groups towards you, or maybe you've noticed judgment between other people and then you've made a judgment about that, right? So it's predominantly because of these beliefs that we've been talking about that sit very, very deeply in the subconscious and the unconscious mind that you don't have any awareness of as yet. And that has just been built over years and years of experiences that you've had, which have now been so filtered that when you do experience it in your own lives, it's really through these heavily clogged up filters on your five senses that distorts your viewpoint of the world or the people in the world around you. So that's a recap. That's a lot of information for today. And I don't want to go any further because your whole digestive system literally has to go through this process of digesting this entire webinar. And it will communicate with those different levels of the mind, and it will communicate with different organs of your body, different systems of your body. And it will all start to just run through, and you'll start to make sense of it, and you'll start to reconcile some of it. And it's got to now be digested, and it's got to be sorted, and then it's going to be turned into knowledge or wisdom and get stored. Kind of no different to when you eat something, right? You digest every experience in life, not just food or what you drink or anything like that. So I want to leave you now to go away, digest that. If any questions come up for you, come back to the questions, put it in comments, put it into the comments, and I will come back and answer it. As I said, next week I'm going to be here in the same place at the same time, and we're going to be then really diving now into judgment. Now that we've looked at the levels of the mind, the five senses, we understand how that all works and how it all comes in. Now we want to go into judgment, and we want to know where it comes from, what it really is, and show you how it can actually be a good thing when we understand it, we perceive it in a certain way, because it's going to tell you a lot about yourself, your past, your family, the reason why things happen to you, or perhaps why things are attracted to you and seem to happen over and over again. And it will start to repair. Okay. So that your experience of your world around you can be less filtered, and you can be feeling more neutral, less judgmental about yourselves and others around you. And that ultimately is going to really return you back home to yourself, and ultimately repair your relationship with yourself. That's ultimately what happens. Okay, so let's check and see if we have any questions at all. Doesn't look like we have any questions. I'll just refresh really, really quickly, see if we have any. Don't forget that there is past webinars, the exhaustion and burnout one that we did. You'll find the 3 of those webinars on the Facebook page. You can go into the video section, search for that, or it's on my YouTube channel. The link for that will be in the comments, and you can find it there in the playlist. And the biggest aspect to those, or one of the most useful, I should say, is the free guide and the checklist that's available for those. They're still available for download. So you can follow the links in those webinar videos. You'll find the link for those downloads in the comments. You can follow that, simply sign up. We'll send them to you by email, and then you can start using them and putting them into play. Okay, beautiful. Well, everyone have an amazing weekend. Really look after yourself. Smile lots, laugh lots, enjoy your connections to people. Challenge what it is that you think you're interpreting. Don't be so quick to judge or compare or project yourself onto anything. And if you find that it's coming towards you, just stand more in a neutral place and be less attached to that and why they're doing it. And then we'll continue on and understand more about it as we go along. Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye for now.